when I was a kid growing up, this is like pre-internet era, I got really into computers. My dad brought home a computer, a PC back, and we played computers. We kind of did a few things, but one day he got a modem, and we were able to dial up into America Online back then. And just at a pretty young age, I fell in love with computers, and started with like modem games and just dialing in, and then eventually I'd break the computer, and then my dad would take it in, get it fixed, and then he'd bring it back. I'd break it. He'd take it in, get it fixed. And after about 3 or 4 times of doing that, he's like, look, if you keep breaking the computer, I am not going to go take it and get it fixed. It's really expensive. Now, being a kid, you just don't really listen. And I broke it again. And he held the line. He said, hey, I'm not taking it back. And you better figure out how to fix it. And that was like my first foray into troubleshooting computers. And so from there, I just really found a personal passion for computers, and then networking came on the scene. Obviously, the internet came about, and high speed computers and bandwidth, really. And I just fell in love with computers. Got into programming, did IT a lot, and there was a time I remember it when Salesforce was just brand new, and they were out pitching this no software movement. And they're like, hey, no software. They're talking about this idea of running an application in a browser. And I remember seeing that and being like, wow, this is really amazing. I mean, the industry, as I understand it, is going to shift. We're going from CD-based software to software delivered online. And that will probably be the biggest shift in computation that will happen in my lifetime. And I really need to make sure I'm understanding this, what we now call SaaS, right? It wasn't called that back then, but I really need to make sure I'm understanding web-based applications, distributed system architecture, and how you can actually deliver a web application through the internet. And anyway, so that was a pivotal moment for me, like learning about that concept, the no software movement, learning about, I learned the Apex programming language, developed a bunch of stuff on Salesforce's platform, and then, went on from there. And so through that journey of learning software development, particularly for the web, we could go into a lot of different areas, but built a lot of different startups, and then had the opportunity to go work with a local startup called Money Desktop at the time. And they had a really cool mission, which was to empower the world to be financially strong. And the premise of Money Desktop when I started was there's all of this data that the banks have. And as banks are now being able to be connected to, and there's a way to get this data, if we could enrich and cleanse and improve this data, we could actually build really powerful tools that would help users improve their financial life. And with the power of financial data, when it's cleansed and it's enriched and it's classified, we could do some really impactful things. So I was an engineer on the Money Desktop team for a while. And then about 1.5 years into my journey at Money Desktop, I got a call from a venture capitalist group that said, hey, we've got a company that we've invested in. It's a completely different space. It was in social media analytics. And they said, hey, we want to change out the management a little bit. Would you be willing to come over? And, I looked at it and said, yeah, sure. And at the time there were about 13 employees. That was called Nuvi. And I was there for 4 years. We grew it to about 120 employees, and then sold it. And when leaving, when I was done kind of transitioning, the Money Desktop guys called me back. And at that point, they had rebranded to MX and said, hey, would you like to come back and run product? And we went through the discussions, and, that's what brought me back to MX. And that was about 4 years ago. So that's kind of the long, the bookends of my journey, and happy to jump in anywhere you want. But that's a little bit how I got to where I am today.
No, thanks for sharing that. I think that it's just fascinating that curiosity that you displayed as a kid growing up, with computers, understanding that space, like that insight that I'd love to double click on that insight around understanding that realization that software, as a service, or that, the web-based applications are going to be a thing. Was that when you were in college, when you were working? What was that realization? When did that moment happen, and how did that influence then your decisions in your career? From that point on.
Yeah. So, double clicking there, and at that time of my life, I went through this little stint in my early 20s. I would have been 22. And so I loved computers, right? I love computation, but for some reason I had this idea that I wouldn't go into computers professionally. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to it's a hobby for me. It's a passion for me. I'm not going to work at it because I don't want this passion and this hobby to be just come like a slog, So I determined I wasn't going to do it. And so instead I started a company that was importing products from China. And I traveled over to China, went all over the place, learning how to source products from China, brought in containers, and was doing a whole bunch of work that way. Well, what happened was we needed a way to inventory all of the products that were coming from China, and the products that we were inventorying had a complex system that would be considered like a matrix-based inventory management system. And so it was very complicated. And I was looking for solutions that I could buy off the shelf. And I called a bunch of places, and I was talking to people about solutions. And they were all of these, I'll call them IT systems, right? Like CD-based install systems. And they were hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I was running a little startup. I mean, I didn't have $200,000 a year for a licensing subscription to Microsoft Dynamics, which said that they could do this matrix-based inventory. And so I started realizing like, hey, maybe I could just build this myself. I knew how to program. I knew I knew a lot about computers. So it was when I was actually researching how to build a matrix-based inventory system that I came across this idea of delivering applications over the web, and thought, hey, maybe I should build it doing that. And long story short, I built this system on Salesforce platform using the Apex programming language, and it was digging in to that whole ecosystem that I saw, whoa, this is powerful. And like I mentioned before, computation as I know it is shifting, and it is shifting now. And it was in that moment I decided, you know what? I am going to get back into tech. I'm going to do this professionally. This is a massive opportunity, and I want to take advantage of it. And that's when I switched my mindset back to like, yes, I want to make a profession out of this. And so I was 25 when that all happened, I was about 24, 25.
Out of interest, what was the product that you were importing and selling?
We were importing construction materials. So, this would have been in like the 2006, 2007 time range. And so the housing economy in the United States was just going gangbusters, right? And people were throwing up these massive multi-unit developments all over the place. So 200, 300, 400 unit townhome or condominium complexes. And so we would bring in cabinets and sinks and faucets and granite and all kinds of stuff to do these massive developments. And it was trying to track all of that and orchestrate all of that we needed inventory management. And, not to get too deep into it, but we ended up building a system where our salespeople could like quote out a job or a big project, and then it would calculate all of the build schedules and everything else we need to do, send it off to China, and then it would handle all of everything in between so that we could then get the product. So that's what we were doing.
That's like very different to starting a business, doing something direct to consumer, or it sounds like you went in pretty on a different pathway. Like that's like real B2B kind of. I'm sure like the volumes would have been huge, the long order cycles and things like that. Like how did you get the I guess the courage to start venturing into that space, even flying to China, and starting to source and figure that out? I'm sure the language barrier would have been difficult as well. Like, where's the courage to run it run at some of these challenges coming from?
Yeah, you know what? Like, this is motivation is kind of a mystery, and I wish I've tried to figure out like where it comes from, because if you look at where I've thought about it in this context is like me compared to my family members, right? And there's like this drive inside that's just, I just want to go try it. And then you talked about curiosity before. I think that's like probably what it is. Like if I was to boil it down, like one idea, just super curious and not really believe, like having the belief that all things are possible. Like you can go out and you can try it. You can like give it a go. And I probably learned that from like computers in my early days, because I started learning, hey, if you read, I would have been 13 years old, I could read all of this stuff about computers and then I could go do it. And just realizing that if you let the curiosity drive and you're not too rigid, then there's opportunity. So like the first time I went to China, it was that curiosity type of a trip. Like, let's go over and just see what it's like. Let's go meet people. We found down in Guangzhou, they have the Canton Fair, and it's a huge trade show. And we're like, let's just go to the trade show and just see. And later I've learned, people say, hey, like half of success is just like showing up. It's putting your rod in the river. And for me, it was really curious. Like, could we do this? Like, what if? Let's try it. And trying to protect yourself, on the downside as much as possible. But still, it was, hey, we're young, and who cares? Let's go.
That's awesome. I really love the curiosity comment, but also that willingness to have a go and give it a crack. I'm interested in your first foray into MX. Like, what was, like, you would have been a fairly early hire in the team. It would have been quite small and growing. Like, what drew you to join Money Desktop? Like, what was the appeal, and what was it like working, in that small team and growing and building the product?
So I had there's in Utah where I grew up, there's a company called Vivint, which does home security automation, big company. And their CTO was a friend and a mentor of mine. And I was talking to him about my just personal journey and getting some advice. And like, what's the next step? Because I'd done a lot in like startup world. Like I just talked about, like, hey, we're importing, and I was building all of this software. And I had worked at a number of different startups and was like, and when I'm saying startups, I'm talking like 2 people, 5 people, 10 people, like starting at the ground level and then building from there. And as I was talking to him about my own personal like growth path, he said, hey, I would suggest you go work for a company that has a little bit of a bigger engineering team. That's like a 20 or 30 person engineering team, because you're going to learn a different perspective of engineering, like at that level, than just at the ground level. And Money Desktop happened to be across the street, and he said, hey, this company is about in this size. Like, you should really go check them out. And as fate would have it, one of their lead engineers was a friend of mine from high school. And so I called him up, and his name was BJ. And I said, hey, BJ, I am interested in Money Desktop. I've heard good things. And he invited me over, and he said, look, you need to come over. You need to meet our CTO. His name is Brandon Dewitt. And come meet Brandon and talk with him. So I went over there, and I met Brandon for the first time, and I was just blown away. He was so smart, so articulate. And I had never met somebody that could go so deep in like the principles of computer science, we'll say, as Brandon. I mean, he was so deep. And I was like, hey, I want to be around that. And I am a believer that you are like the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And then just by being around good people and being open and flexible, you can like, you'll level up. That's a good, strong way to level up your own skill. And so I said, hey, I need to go do this. I need to spend time with Brandon. It took me about 6 months to actually like make the leap and say, hey, I'm going to go from being a like entrepreneur startup, like doing this stuff to having a job, excuse me, just working as a software development engineer. But I did it, and I loved it. I mean, in the early days, I met so many super smart people and people that were just really, really smart. I got to surround myself with very intelligent people. And in the early days, oh man, I could go into, I don't want to go on a tangent. Well, maybe I'll pause right there. Happy to go into anywhere in about MX, but like it was cool because we were building and we were discovering what to build, but yet we were talking with financial institutions. Like we'd go meet with big banks, and even though we were a small company, we were building really, really cool technology that made a difference for the banks. And so it was just just a different level. And because of my background in startups and running businesses, I had the opportunity as an engineer to travel around and meet a lot of these financial institutions and go and talk to their CTOs and their executive team and get involved at that level, which was really, really exciting.
Like I'm interested, and that sounds like a fascinating journey. And we'll double click on Brandon and your relationship with him a little bit later. What made you a good early hire? Because clearly they obviously, after you left, wanted you back. So there was something special that you had. So I think being an early employee, you went from being in the startup scene, running your own thing, to now being an early employee. Like, one, what was that transition like? Because there may have been more of a lack of autonomy. You're not your own boss. You've got a paycheck. You've got to rock up to work. So how was that transition? And I think the second part of my question is, like, what makes a good early employee, right? Like, what were you doing to add value that was different to, like, when you're employee number 1,000 versus number 20, 30?
Yeah. So I'll hit on the first question. The transition was actually like really, really good. And this may sound like crazy, but when you're like early startup, doing your own thing, or being like the first 5 or like really young, 10 people or less, your life is, there's no difference between work and life. It is one thing. And so 100% of the time, 24/7, 365, it doesn't matter if it's Christmas, it doesn't matter if it's New Year's, nothing matters. You are on, like you are working, you are thinking about work. Like when you're in charge of making payroll, you are thinking work all the time. And I remember the transition in the first year, we got to Christmas time, and MX, our Money Desktop at the time, they had this like Christmas shutdown. And so they would shut down the business from like the 25th of December to the 3rd of January. And everyone was off, no work. And I remember that experience, and my wife, she's like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever like had the opportunity to be a part of. You didn't work for 8 days straight. That has never happened. I had been married, probably 9 years at that point. In the 9 or 10 years of marriage, that has never happened. Not even we go on vacation and you're work. So the transition, I actually liked it. I know some people talk about the rat race and other things of being part of jobs, but until you've been in the grind of just working for years and years and years on your own, or in a small group where you are responsible for everything, you don't realize how great it is. Even a holiday, like, hey, you know what? It's Memorial Day and we're going to take the day off. So for me, I actually really liked the experience. Honestly, it was a very good transition. I want to hit on your second question, and now I don't remember what it was.
Just like what makes a good early employee?
Oh,
Because
early employee.
yeah,
So I didn't know this at the time, but looking back, I think I've since learned this. And I, just for reference, where I got the concept from was the company Valve. They have the Valve company handbook, and if for any of the audience, if you haven't read it, go search it. It's really cool. They have some really really great alternative concepts to running a business and hiring and how to just run a company in general. But in the Valve company handbook, they have this idea about a T-shaped employee. And they say, look, we really want people who are T-shaped, that they have a broad range of skills and they can cover a lot of different areas, but yet they do have one area that they can go deep in. And they're experts, they're pros at that thing, but yet, they're pretty well, like growing up, I use the term well-rounded, like they're pretty well-rounded people. And so what I think was a good benefit for me going in is that I would say T-shaped. I was a well-rounded employee. Like I could get in with finance, and I understood accounting, the fundamentals of accounting, and I could look at a P&L, and I could look at a balance sheet and a statement of cash flows, and I could read it and understand it. And that's not really the role of a software engineer, but I could do that. I understood marketing. And not like really deep, but marketing 101, like how to generate a lead, how to create an ad, how to do basic internet marketing, and understanding the flow of like a buyer journey, that how people come in and actually buy software. And, you go into some of these different areas. And so it just, especially when it's early, I could just contribute in a lot of different ways than just software engineering. And I don't mean to downplay software engineering, because that's what I love and that's my passion, but we would be building things and having ideas and then meeting with clients. And I could like put the whole picture together and be like, oh, look, this is a product that we could take to the market. Maybe this is how we could price it. Maybe this is how we could pay for it. Maybe this is how we could capitalize it. And this is how the R&D tax credit would work. And you just know a lot about a lot of different things. And early on, that is very, very beneficial. Now, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you're generally looking for like hyper focused experience and super depth. I'll say PhD level depth, because you need those specialists. But early on, those T-shaped employees are invaluable.
well, that's really helpful. I think that like it's almost the concept of like a generalist, but then with a degree of depth to help drive an area and function, but being able to substitute in and add an opinion on other areas. What about from like an attitude or mindset perspective? Like, I mean, I've been at Airwallex. It feels very chaotic, often all the time. But there's a lot of challenges that come with working in a startup environment. Like, what mindset do you think is important? To contribute well and and continue on that journey? Because often I think one reflection I've had is it often feels like a sprint, but it's a marathon. Like you have to work at it for a very long time, but it feels like a sprint almost every day. So talk to me about your mindset and how that's been helpful.
Yeah, so I'll give some very tactical things on the mindset, and then maybe some higher level things. So you're right that it feels like a sprint and there's a lot of chaos, but it is a marathon. Like you have to have the longevity to make it. And so when I went and transitioned to MX, or sorry, Money Desktop. I'll use those interchangeably, MX and Money Desktop. But when I was at Money Desktop, I started doing MMA in the morning. So I'd go box or learn jujitsu. There was an MMA gym. And look, I'm a software engineer. Like I'm not a fighter. I'm not like built and tough or any of that, right? But I started exercising really, really hard in the morning, harder than I ever had. And I found that when I got to work, my mind was like, it was an outlet for all of this stress. And so my mind was very, very clear. And having something that you can focus on, especially if you can do it in the morning, you can focus on, and it requires your like full attention that you can't be thinking about work. You can't be thinking about problems. So MMA was a big one for me when I started. And I did that while I was at MX or at Money Desktop. Later, I got into downhill mountain biking, which is very similar. Like you have to be 100% focused. For the last 2 years, I've been really into surfing. Surfing is the same way. Like your big waves coming, you got to duck dive it or you got to drop in. You're not thinking about anything. So on the mindset side, first of all, is like find something that can just take you away and get your adrenaline rush, get your focus, take you away from work. I think that's really helpful with your mindset. The second thing is, and this is in software engineering, but you could apply it to a lot of different skills. I had this mindset that there were two halves of the day. There was morning and the afternoon. And when I came in the morning, my goal was before lunch, I was going to write enough code to get a pull request out. And I don't know how technical the audience is, but it's basically a change to the code that is complete and that you can take up to production. And so I'd start the morning with a very clear goal, get a pull request out. Then I would go to lunch and I would just release. I wouldn't think about it. I'd try to go with people and take a break. And then I would come back. And in the afternoon, I'd either have meetings, or if it was I would do another pull request. I'd try to say before the end of the day, I'm going to get another pull request out. And my goal was always to get 2 pull requests a day, assuming I didn't have meetings in those days, 2 pull requests a day. And what that did for me mentally was it put me on like a cadence that was aggressive, but it wasn't going to burn me out. But I had this little mantra that I would say, like, make measurable progress in reasonable time. And every day I just need to make measurable progress. And a day, 8-hour workday, 10-hour workday is enough time to make some progress. But I saw a lot of people that would just spin and spin and spin, and they weren't making consistent progress every single day. And I just found if you can find a way every day make progress, sometimes the days, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, it may not look like you've made a ton of progress, but you go 30 days and look back and you are just blown away with what you've been able to accomplish. And just to use a story from MX early or Money Desktop early days, I did a couple projects, and then Brandon said, "Hey, I want you to take on this really challenging project, and we have to rip out a bunch of code from all of the different microservices that we have in the system, and you really have to go in like a surgeon with a scalpel and just like cut this out, and you've got to be extremely careful because it could take down, if you mess it up in one place, it could take down the entire system." And so I just said, okay, like that's the project I'm on. And I just every day, 2 pull requests a day, just boom, 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 made tiny iterations, made sure it was safe, deployed early, deployed often, got it out. And it took me 3 months. That's a long project, but at the end, it was awesome. And after that, Brandon came to me and he said, "Hey, anything you want to do in the platform, you can do." Like the fact that you were able to do that is a huge project. It is massive. Like you pick your work, you get to do anything you want. And that was just for me, it was just another validation point on consistent daily effort over a long period of time leads to really good results.
How did Brandon get that trust to, the amount of trust he displayed in that situation, both to one, give you the project, and then 2, the statement you just made, whatever project you want, whatever you want to work on, that's a lot of trust, to have with someone. Like, how did that build and evolve over time? Was that from, the minute you joined and straight away, or was that something you developed with him over time?
No, I don't think it was from the minute I joined, because it was, I don't think everybody like had that, but one of the things that I did, he commented on this later, like years and years later. But when I started, I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought this. It's like an artist sketchbook. So, it was probably it was big too. It was like 11 by 17. I mean, this thing was massive, and it was just full of blank pictures that you would do sketches on for an artist. And I would carry this thing around. And every time I met with somebody, an engineer, I would diagram out what we were talking about. And I diagram out the system, I diagram out the code. And over, probably after my first 60 days, I had this book full of how the system worked. And I mean, our own documentation wasn't as good as my little like artist sketchbook, right? And so then what ended up happening was, when new developers would come on, new engineers would come onto the team and they wanted to get trained, Brandon would just say, hey, go talk to Brett. He's got this book. He can kind of take you through how the system works. And so over time, what had happened is all these new people would come in. I would start teaching them. And I just knew so much about the system that I think that relationship built. He saw like the work I was putting in and the dedication I had to really understand the system, and like the care for quality that I had. And then as I was teaching new people, that's when he's like, hey, why don't you take this really critical project? And then when I did it, it was kind of earned over time. But that was later he told me about the book and the impression that made on him. And that was such a unique thing in his eyes that I would put a lot of the trust that we built from that practice. And it wasn't like I was doing it to impress anyone. I was just trying to understand a complicated system.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that story. Like what prompted the decision to leave MX and join Nuvi? And what was the Nuvi experience?
That was a hard one because in the year, over the time that I worked at Money Desktop, I became really good friends with a lot of people all across the company, from the sales team to obviously the engineering team, but even marketing. And I just built so many good relationships. But when this company called me, there was a family office based out of Provo, Utah. They had invested in Nuvi. Like, I gave them, an initial in their initial capital raise. They had gone through that money, and then the owners of Nuvi were coming back to the investors to say, hey, look, we need another round. And we think we have a cool idea. But, obviously we need more money. And so they called me up and said, hey, look, we want you to come in, and we're going to bring in 2 leaders. We're going to bring someone to run sales, and we want you to come in and run pretty much everything else. And so that was, the accounting and the marketing and the product and the engineering. And it was running a lot of different things in a startup like context. And it was a hard decision, but the thing that rang true to me was like getting back to the startup roots, getting back to the, not just software engineering, but doing software engineering in the context of product and tied with accounting and marketing and everything else. And, I saw what they were doing. I thought it was really great. It was taking large amounts of data from social media, doing sentiment analysis on it, doing analytics on it for big brands, and then really understanding what the market was saying. And so I thought the problem space was fascinating, but it rang to that like entrepreneur side of me. And then that's why I made the change.
Yeah. Amazing. And like, I'm interested because like leaving a company that you've had a fantastic relationship with, you've built lots of friendships. Like, how did you do that in a way that didn't burn those bridges, right? And like allowed it sounds like you were a very highly trusted, valued person in the company at that point. And so I'm sure they would have tried, and they would have been terribly disappointed to see you go. But how did you maintain that relationship and keep that trust with them so that, you could have another go, in a few years and come back around?
I'll put the credit on Brandon for this. I remember I went to lunch with Brandon and I said, hey, I got this call from these people. Here's the opportunity. Here's what they want me to do. And I just took him through it. I was just like super transparent with him. And I said, I asked him, like, what do you think? And, he turned that around on me. What do I think? And I said, hey, I think this could be a really good opportunity for me. And, it's in my wheelhouse of things to do and what I know how to do. And he was just super supportive of it. Like, hey, like, I think this could be really good for you. I think this could be good. And I was really appreciative of that. Like, I was, in fact, that was a big, like, defining moment for me, like a leadership moment. And so to this day, like when people come and they say, hey, look, I'm thinking about I've got this other job offer, or I'm going to go work at this company, or whatever, like they decide to transition, I'm probably people's biggest advocate because of that, and saying like, hey, you should, like, if it's your time to move on and you feel like you've, outgrown, not saying I had outgrown MX or Money Desktop, but if you feel like, hey, you've outgrown what you can do here, like, great, like, continue to work on yourself, develop yourself, level up, gain new skills, gain new friendships, gain new relationships. And if you think this is the right path, like, I'm your number one supporter. And I think what that's led to at MX, and just for Brandon, is you have a lot of boomerangs that come back. They may leave MX and then they come back, and I'm one of them, right? And there's a number of people on our team that are like that, and so I'll always remember. I did have a lot of good, because I spanned so many different departments and had a lot of relationships. They threw a party for me at the end, my last day, and they gave me a surfboard, a wake surfboard, that you use behind the boat. And it said MD on it. It was green and black. And I wish I had I could show you a picture of it sometime, but I just have it in my office at my house. And it's hanging up there. And it was I have a picture of that moment. And that moment actually went down in like MX or Money Desktop history. Nobody got a surfboard since. So I'll take that as a sign of good relationships.
That's amazing. I think that ability to put the person before the needs of the business, like, it sounds like that's what Brandon's done. That's what you've been doing now in your career. Like, I think that's really special. Like, it's hard. I think, like, as a founder or someone senior in the business, to, like, you've got goals that you need to hit, targets that you need to hit. These are key people, that might be leaving, but to be able to put that context to one side, compartmentalize that, and say, this is probably what's best for this employee or this individual. I think that's really special.
Yeah, I think Brandon was a real. I could sing Brandon's praises, my whole life, and what I learned from him. But he just had this really profound ability to, like, look at the individual and see, like, the next 3 iterations of that individual, and then show them the next 3 iterations of themselves. Like, hey, you can get to this point. Like, you have this in you, and this is what I see for you. I mean, he was just very, very good that way, and really looking at, just the person, and really understanding, having empathy for the person, when I think it's so easy to just think about your own problems, the impact that it probably had on him for when I left, and the rest of the team. Like, a lot of us are self-centered in that approach. And I think that's natural. Brandon used to call it our default mode. And just to, like, get out of the default mode and think about other people, and what is it that's best for their journey and for their next best iteration of themselves. He was really masterful at that.
Maybe let's talk a little bit about your experiences, Brandon, some of the challenges, and maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing. I think I've done I've watched a bunch of videos of Brandon speaking and reading articles that he's written, and it's just, I feel inspired just to, like, be able to even see and hear a little bit about what he had to share with the world. But do you want to talk the audience through, what happened, what was the challenge and those circumstances that you all had to go through?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So when this is hard for me. So Brandon became one of my really good friends, one of my best friends, and it was about a year after I left, year and a half after I left MX. Brandon was diagnosed with cancer, and we had a little tradition. We would go to lunch. We'd go to this place in Orem called Bailey's Sandwich Shops, best sandwiches around. And one day before I knew, I just texted him, hey, do you want to go to grab some lunch? And he said, yeah, that would be great. And we sat down, and that's when he told me, he's like, hey, I've got stage 4 cancer. They've given me, basically they've told me to wrap up my affairs, and, I've got, 90 days, if I'm lucky. And I remember that moment it's just like your whole world starts spinning. You know, somebody that you care and you love for and has been a mentor for you tells you like, hey, the end is in sight. Like, they've told me I have a date. I'm just trying to like wrap things up. And it really puts a lot of perspective on the life and the meaning of life and what we do with our time and the way we treat other people. But anyway, to make a long story a little bit shorter, he I think after he got over the initial like processing of this idea, he was like, no, I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna go. I want to figure this out. Like, can we prolong this diagnosis? How long can I stay around for? Because technology is advancing so fast in the area of medicine. If I could just hold on for one more year, maybe medicine would be to the point that it could cure this cancer, and maybe another year. And so he traveled around. He traveled around the United States, visiting a lot of different doctors, looking at his situation and saying, how can we treat my condition? And, miraculously found one doctor that said, like, yeah, well, there's some treatments that we can try, and, let's give it a shot. And that ended up prolonging his life for about, it ended up, let me kind of go into some of the details. So he starts getting on this treatment, and it starts to prolong his life, and that actually the cancer starts to reduce and basically go away. And it was just this miracle story of having this 90-day terminal diagnosis and being able to overcome that. And so when Nuvi, when I was finished with Nuvi, and Brandon called me, he's like, hey, would you be interested in coming back to MX? I thought, you know what? This is probably I don't know how long Brandon's going to be around for. This is probably the last chance that I'll ever get to be able to work with him again, every day, day in and day out, solving problems with him. And it was on that one idea that I decided to go back to MX. That, look, I don't know how long Brandon's going to be around for, and I'm just going to do it. And so I joined the team, and Brandon continued to have his battle, but for 4 years, I mean, he was doing really, really good. And then last year, at the beginning of the year, it took a turn for the worse, and it started going, downhill. And they tried, different treatments and different things, and alternative approaches to battling the cancer. And and eventually in November, he passed away from cancer. And so that was just a few months ago, and that was it was a bittersweet moment, because on one hand, this friend and this mentor, this person who had just impacted the world in such a good way was gone, and that's the bitter part. The sweet part was, he was free from the pain that he had been living in. At that point, I think it was 6 years, free from that pain. He had left a beautiful legacy, and I just, thank God that I went back to MX and had the opportunity to work with him again, and just, I'll never regret that. And, and so part of, part of what I'm trying to do at MX, and to just carry forward some of his philosophy and some of his approach and his ideas, and just, and what he stood for, and try to carry that forward at some way. So, sorry, getting a little emotional about this, but it was just such an amazing life from a genius person. And it's unfortunate that sometimes the most special people in the world we lose too early. And that was the case for Brandon. We lost him far too early.
Thanks for sharing that, Brett, and for being so honest. And I'm sure it's difficult today, and I'm sure it was difficult, over the years as well. What did you learn about being a good friend for him over that period? What lessons did you learn about being a good colleague? Because you were a friend, a close friend, you were a colleague, you were a peer, you were working with a team that was, I'm sure, also impacted, by this. Um, how did you both navigate through this difficult circumstance? Like, it's still a high growth environment as well. Like, you guys were growing, like, the business was going places, and still is. And so it's just a really complicated, difficult situation. Like, what were some of the things that you found helpful, whether it was, for yourself personally, or for your team, or even for your customers, I'm sure, who would have been impacted.
Yeah. So a couple of things I found myself doing is that when we would hang out, like we would be together, go to lunch or go just hang out on the weekends or whatever it may be. I tried not ever to talk about work uh, because, and I didn't talk about work too much, and I didn't talk about his his cancer. And I know a lot of, like, the default was for people to like ask about the cancer and I think show empathy through asking questions and being interested. And a lot of people would want to show like, hey, I am interested. I care about you. I want to learn about this. And for me, I thought, you know what? He tells this to so many people. He every time he's got to tell his story, he's got to like relive the pain of it and the realization. And so I tried to stay away from that. Um, sometimes we would talk work because he wanted to talk work, and that was really interesting. But I tried just to keep it pretty neutral, to have that downtime, so it wasn't always on 24/7 like I talked about before. But then when I went to work, in the day, it was just, hey, what can I do to lighten the load? What can I do to make it easy? How do we make it easy for Brandon? Because it's so hard. Running a company is so challenging. It's very lonely. It's you. I don't think people really get this idea until they've really experienced it. But there's a lot of, I think, perceived glamour of being, like in Brandon's case, a CTO. Hey, you're the CTO. You're a co-founder, and we give a lot of accolades to that position in society, the co-founder title, the CTO title. But it's tough. Like, every day you get to hear all the problems, and people, I don't know if people realize that, like, you get bombarded every single day with all the problems. And so you take all of that on top of your own personal problems. And in Brandon's case with his cancer, it's just a lot to bear. And so I would just try, hey, that was my mantra. Like, what can I do to make it easy for Brandon? What can I do to make it easier? And if there's anything that I could put on my shoulders, if there's anything that I could take on, if anything I could do, I just make it easier. And I actually learned this phrase from a book. I think it's called The One Thing, by the Keller Williams CEO. He said he had this focusing question, and he asked himself, if there's what's the one thing that I could do that by doing it, everything else would become easier or unnecessary. And that became like a really interesting, like, mental exercise for me, because I would start thinking through that, and like in helping Brandon and helping other parts of the business, I would just ask myself that focusing question. What's the one thing that I could do that by doing it, everything else would become easier or unnecessary? And it's actually really powerful. It took me a while to really get into like the spirit of what it was saying, but I can see why he wrote a book about it. And why the I'm forgetting his name, but I know he's the CEO of Keller Williams Real Estate, and it's very, very powerful question.
What about and I think I really empathize with. I think we've had a few guests on the show who've talked about how leadership can feel very lonely and often a very thankless job. And I think even as employees and folks who are working in startups and working for founders, like, I think we all need to develop a degree of empathy and I think an understanding of the fact that these are challenging circumstances to be in, even when things are going well, and you don't have crises at home or in your personal circumstances. What about for your team? Like the organization is enormous, right? Like you have, I think, 1,000+ employees now, or around that. Like how are you as a leader, a senior leader in that business, helping the junior employees, the folks that are just joining, the folks that have been around for a while? How are you helping them to figure out, how they can process and move forward? And what did you do to support your teams? What did you find effective, to help them through this journey as well?
Yeah, one of the things that happened naturally, I mean, this wasn't like because I was so close to Brandon, and it's a really tough situation and a very emotional situation. I would talk about it with the team, and the team, I believe they saw the emotion coming from me and how impacted that I was, and had a few vulnerable moments in front of the team that it would just kind of naturally happen. But the feedback I got later was like, hey, it was helpful to see that you were having a tough time with this and how much it impacted you. And it made me feel like justified in the way that I, as an individual contributor or team member was feeling, because I've been having a rough time and everybody seems like they're doing okay. But just to see that it's okay that this hurts. It's okay that you can be, your true and authentic self, that you can be vulnerable in front of the group. There doesn't need to be this like machoism or this like, you're stone cold. It's like you can be a human and you can be a human at work, and that's okay. And just allowing that environment to be present and for that to be okay, I think was one big impactful thing. And I think the other part of it was just we giving people the time. At this point we're remote now, and back then we were probably even more remote. But when we start a Zoom meeting, just letting people share their thoughts, letting people share good memories. Sometimes we would start a meeting with like, hey, what were kind of the funny things funniest moments with Brandon? We kind of laugh. And what were some of the hardest moments? We just talk about it. We just let people be open and let them express their emotion. So they didn't have to bottle it up and they didn't have to be alone. Because that's one of the challenging things is when you have to be alone, and remote work and COVID and the isolation that we've had hasn't helped with that. But I know there's like bigger themes there with, authenticity at work and being yourself. And I think there's a lot of power in that when it's done authentically and not from like a check the box, like, oh, we're supposed to do this. And so we do. But when there really is an authenticness to it, and it felt like there was around Brandon, it really made a big cultural difference.
How do you handle the responsibility to continue on, even though things are really hard? You've run your own startups. You've had small teams where you've had to make payroll. So you've I think felt that pressure and accountability for other people at a micro level, but also now at like a very large organization. There's this, I think, a burden that comes with leadership in your role, where you need to make sure that people are getting paid. They've got a job to come to. And how do you continue to handle that responsibility and that burden without it, affecting you, adversely? How do you carry on and move forward? In addition to like with those existing responsibilities, with all the things that were happening, in Brandon's situation as well.
Yeah, there's something about the human psyche, the human brain, the human spirit, that when you have a purpose that you're working towards, and that it's not artificial, it's not made up, it's like really something that you're passionate about, and you do have that that true sense of like, call it higher purpose or purpose, it just seems to carry you through difficult times. And when Brandon passed away, we had had enough discussions to, I knew where Brandon wanted to see the business go. I knew what his vision was. I knew what he was dedicating his life to. And for some reason, I felt like that just transferred to me, and there was a duty to like carry that forward and to have the best possible outcome for MX and to carry forward like the mission and really what he was trying to accomplish with the business. And Brandon used to say, he had all these aphorisms and these little sayings that he would use, but one of them was purpose over profits. And this idea of like having a company that's really out there trying to make a difference in the world and make an impact. And it's not out there to just create more shareholder value. It's not out there just to create more profits. It's not a nonprofit, right? But it's out there to create real value for society. That was impactful for me. And so as we look at, our mission, empower the world to be financially strong, one of the things for me that coming through this was like, look, what can I do what can MX do, and what can I do as a leader to really impact the world that we live in? And in the United States, like open banking isn't really a thing. We have a closed financial ecosystem, and I do believe that as data gets out and as data is shared, that it actually can spawn a lot of innovation. But all that data resides in these silos, and so right now, for me, like that purpose is the way that we can empower people is actually like unlocking this data source. And we're going to empower them somewhat indirectly in the sense that let's get data flowing. Let's get innovation on financial health really ramping up. FinTech obviously is very hot, but so many people are in a different financial like state, and they come from different upbringings, and they come from different they could come from different like religions, and they could come from different backgrounds, and they just there's so much diversity in the United States that I'm not a believer that there's like one financial application that's going to solve it for everybody. And so you start to break down what are the components, first principles thinking about how do we actually then help people. Well, one, we start with the connectivity. How do people get their data? And then two, what can they do with that data? And then three, can we get that into the hands of as many like really smart financial technology companies that want to go help people as possible? And let's go solve this problem. And so maybe some startup is out there trying to optimize finances for a very specific demographic that they are very close to, that they understand the mindset of, they understand the belief system of, they understand their approach to money, and they can build technology to help that group out and in the paradigm or the worldview that they have. And so for me, my big like passion project right now, if you want to call it a passion project, but the thing I'm driving towards is like, how do I help every bank and credit union in the United States and Canada get an API? Because once we can get that data flowing, I believe there's going to be a massive amount of innovation that happens. And there's a lot of innovation happening right now, a lot of investment going into fintech, but I think that will just be exponentially compounded. And that really is the basis of it. And not to get too much on a tangent here, but you look at what Tesla is doing with autonomous driving, and the fact that we can have a vehicle that has all of this engineering and machine learning and data science going into making it drive itself. And they're able to do that because they have all of these cars that are on the roads with cameras, and there's all of this data coming in, and they're able to take the data, learn from the data, improve the models, and you have this self-driving autonomous vehicle. But why can't we do that with finances? Like, why can't we have a computer that just goes and grabs all the information. It knows my paycheck. It knows my mortgage. It knows everything about me. And it just handles my finances. It pays my bills when they need to be paid. Tells me how much I can spend. It runs my financial life for me, and it makes sure I don't drive off a cliff. And the technology is there. Like we have the computational power, we have the bandwidth, we have the memory power, we have, supercomputers in our pocket that could do this. What we don't have is this ecosystem where the data can just freely flow to train all these systems. Like, it's way too closed. And so if we can unlock that and we can get the data out there, we can start training these models, we can start training these systems, and we can have this autonomous, I think about it as like a personal financial controller. You look at very, very wealthy people, they have controllers that just run all their money and they do it all for them. And they can do that because they have the money to pay somebody full time. Well, the great leveling factor of technology is that we can take things that were once only available to the super wealthy, and we can bring that to everybody. And I think this idea of a personal financial assistant or a personal financial controller is possible with technology. And I think that we have the tech, we just don't have the data flowing in the right way. And so, sorry, that's like a big long tangent coming back to your original question, but these were things that Brandon and I were riffing on and talking about, like how this was possible and like what needed to change with regulation and what needed to change in the minds of bank executives and credit union executives in order for this world to happen. And this is how we think we can put our dent in the universe. And this is what we're going after. And I feel like it's carrying the torch a little bit from Brandon's legacy to make this a reality.
That's really, I think, quite an amazing mission and vision. And I think it's incredible to see you in your role, CMX, I think, trying to pioneer and push for that, in so many different ways. I'm mindful of time. We've got a couple of quick closing questions, and appreciate the all of your insights so far. I wanted to leave you with one of my, I'll at least get your reaction to one of my favorite Brandon quotes. One that I heard in one of his talks, and interested in your reaction to this and what it means to you. He said, "Always good to be humble, often good to be humbled."
Did you hear the story of where that came from?
No, I didn't. Yeah, I'm interested. Yeah.
Oh man, that's a good story. So not a lot of people knew this at the time, but Brandon started dating this girl, Kara Parkey, and Kara worked at MX in a different department. And one of the things that Brandon liked to do was play ping pong, and Kara liked to play ping pong. And so we were at I think it was the FinTech, what we call the FinTech Festival. We bring a bunch of people to Sundance, a bunch of FinTech banks and FinTechs, and we get them together and we talk about the industry. Anyway, there at the conference, there was a ping pong table, and Brandon and Kara were playing ping pong, and Brandon was like, I don't know how to say it the right way. Like, Brandon was competitive, and so even when he was playing his girlfriend, he wanted to win because that was just him. He's a competitive person. And Kara ended up just like stomping him at ping pong. And it was one of these things like, hey, let's play a game. And then Kara won. And then, of course, best 2 out of 3. And, it progresses until you're 20 games into it. And Kara's still just like laying the smack on Brandon, just beating him at ping pong. And there was another one of these little Brandonisms. He had this belief to make it memorable. And what could you do to like memorialize a moment, and you could make it memorable and you could remember it for your whole life. And so anyway, after that experience with Kara playing ping pong, he saved the ping pong ball, and he had a trophy made where he mounted the ping pong ball in a glass box. And then on the front, he had that quote, often, what is it? Let's see. Often good to be humble, often good to be humbled, or something like that. and just memorializing that he had just totally got humbled at ping pong. And he had such a great way with words. He was very big on using the right words in the right context to convey the right meaning. And so that saying is a really good example of Brandon taking a moment and finding the right way to articulate and capture the spirit of the moment in, in that saying. And so, always good to be humble, often good to be humbled. So that's the story behind it.
No, I appreciate. I think I had heard him say it, or I think I'd seen a video of the table tennis ball, but I didn't have the context of the story behind it. But the story makes the saying even better, I think, to be honest. So that's fantastic. I guess my last question, Brett, like if you could give yourself one piece of advice at the start of your career, and you could travel back in time, knowing everything you know now, what would that be?
If I could give myself one piece of advice traveling back in time, what would it be? When I was like going back to my early 20s and maybe even before that, like I was really, really ambitious, really motivated, really driven. And with that became like a sense of urgency. Like I had to do it fast. I had to, get to a certain amount of money in a certain point of time. I had to have a certain size company at a certain size time. And I had to have a, certain number of employees and a certain size building. And like, there's all of these goals that I have and had. And you read some of the basic ideas around goal setting and you'll learn about SMART goals, right? And it needs to be specific and attainable and measurable and time bound and like all these things. And I think some of that time bound concept, like I didn't realize like you've got time, and you don't have to like be a billionaire in your 20s, right? Or a millionaire in your 20s, whatever your ambition is. And honestly, if you try to chase it too much, if you try to chase success, it will like flee from you. Like it like runs away. And if you try to like cut the corners or you try to make it happen too quick, it'll just be fleeting. But if you can turn it around and say, look, I've got time. I mean, you think about all the stuff you learn in college, right? Like 4 years, you're there 4 years or 6 years. I mean, there's so many experiences you have, so many classes you're taking, you're learning things and you're like consuming all this information. That's only 4 years. You turn 22, you got a long time to go. And I don't think I didn't, so I won't put this on everybody else, but I didn't realize I got a long time to go. And so I don't need to chase success, but I need to attract success. And the way that I attract success is becoming an attractive person. And I become an attractive person by working on myself. I gain the skills. I learn multiple skills, in the marketplace. I learn about software engineering. I learn about computer science. I learn about marketing. I learn about finance and accounting. And I, talk about T-shaped employees. Like you become an attractive person, and then you attract success. Like the success will come once you have become that person. And I believe in that. I've lived by that. And I for the best that I can tell, that's why, a venture capitalist group called me on the phone one day and said, hey, we want you to come do this. It wasn't like I applied. I didn't like fill out a resume or something, because I think, I had worked enough and said, hey, I want to be like a well-rounded person that someone would want to call on the phone to like run their company, right? I want to be the person that MX would call to like come back and run product. And they would call me because of the person that I had become, not because I was chasing success or anything else. And so just going back to the beginning and saying, look, let me chart out some of the key things that I can do over a long period of time to become attractive. And I hope that word's okay, like in the context I'm using it, to become an attractive person in the marketplace. And so maybe you start thinking about it differently. You start saying, hey, like, I didn't like writing in college, but if I'm going to be effective in the marketplace, I need to be a good writer. I need to be a good speaker. So maybe let me get some speaking coaching, and let me actually work on speaking for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. I mean, it seems like an eternity, but in the span of a career, it's really not that long. Like, take time and go to a negotiating class and a course and just learn. You might not be in procurement as a procurement officer, but like go take some courses in procurement after college, and in your 30s or whatever, to learn the craft of negotiation and vendor management and how to get the best price and the best deal. And just work harder on yourself than you do on anything else, and that work will pay off, and success will come because it'll be attracted by who you are, not by what you're chasing.
That's incredible, Brett. I think it reminds me of my favorite Charlie Munger quote of like, to get what you want, deserve what you want. And like that insight that you're sharing of like attracting success by being an attractive person, I think really deeply resonates with me. And I think it's something we all can take away and think about. How are we working on ourselves rather than chasing, this goal of success or attaining success that can often be fleeting. No, really, thanks so much for this conversation and for being so honest and transparent and talking us through, I think, some very deeply emotional topics, and how you've, I think, navigated a fascinating career and I think personal journey as well. I guess as we wrap up, are there any thoughts and anything else you want to share with our audience? Where can they find you? Publicly. Is MX hiring, looking for talent? So anything we can do and the audience can do to help you in your journey?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and I do have a public profile. You're mainly going to see like surfing pictures and like lifestyle type of stuff. So it's not really like business, but more just, we have one of our values at MX is exuberance for life. And so, if you're I love that. I just love life. I've been learning to surf. I got my private pilot's license. And so like that whole exuberance for life part, you can see on Instagram. I think my Instagram's like Brett Allred. And I'm on Twitter, Brett N. Allred. You can reach out to me there, DM me or ping me or whatever. And, would love, if there were questions, love to answer questions, engage with the community. And, one of the things I love just personally is just helping where I can help and sharing parts of my own journey with people on an individual level. And so I'll often go speak at colleges and share some of my, just approach to life. And I love it when people reach out and they just say like, hey, like, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. And this is kind of what I'm confronting, because life is different for us all. And so just, reach out on Twitter. Brett N. Allred, I believe, is my handle, or on Instagram, Brett Allred. You can follow me, message me, whatever. But I'd love to engage. I'd love to, chat with the audience. And I'd love to get down to Australia and come surf and come hang out, just catch up.